Last week, we barely got through only one episode of Season 5, the season premiere, but took plenty of necessary detours through the Australian apocalypse of Mad Max and the righteous rapist ghost at the center of High Plains Drifter. This hour, we'll continue with the season and cover everything from Italian spy movie ripoffs to Italian spy movie ripoffs. What? That doesn't make sense? Give me 40 minutes. It's also the shortest episode ever, which is a win-win for everyone. I'm Ryan Rodriguez, and this is the Coolness Chronicles, Season 1, The History and Legacy of MST3K. Chapter 6, The Beginning of an End. Continued. Hey! Remember in the previous chapter when I discussed Hercules? Well, the second produced episode of the season, but first aired, was the original Steve Reeves Hercules.
And immortal was the strength of Hercules. Savage and sensual was the world of Hercules.
I'll summarize the plot. Hercules is strong and uses his strength to do things. That's about it. Luckily, there's an actual episode wrapped around the movie that I have something to say about. There's a terrific sketch where Tom proposes new constellations to update ancient Greek astrology to modern times. For instance,
carefully. The first grouping of stars found in the southern sky forms a constellation for even the simplest hayseed crow. Yes, it's a ham sandwich. Fascinatingly, the star to the left of the main group forms a perfect pickle.
I don't know why this tickles me so much. Maybe I'm just a fan of Kevin's decision to pronounce sandwich as sandwich, which he does frequently. In fact, if you're feeling blue and there just seems to be no antidote, just close your eyes and say sandwich. It just might make you smile, or not. I'm no psychic. But the indisputable highlight of this episode is also possibly the darkest moment of Joel's entire run on the show. It starts off innocently enough as Crow presents his one-man show about Match Game host Gene Rayburn, complete with that weird microphone Rayburn used. And Crow, as Gene, asks a standard riddle to the Match Game panel comprised of Richard Dawson, Bette Summers, Charles Nelson Riley, Nipsey Russell, Fannie Flagg, and Betty White, all of whom Crow, impersonates quite well. But when the time comes to answer the riddle, the lights on the SOL go dim, and Crow, as Rayburn, channels his inner Hamlet and brings the pain.
Well, let's see if there were any other matches, because we're running out of time. And I'm afraid time was running out for me, too. Those were happy, carefree days. I thought I'd host Match Game forever, but alas, it was not meant to be. Don't get me wrong, I wish only the best for Ross Schaefer. The truth is that old game show hosts like me are a dying blank. Charles Nelson Riley, can you hear me? Bette Summers, are you out there? Richard Dawson, where are you? Fannie Flagg, answer me. Betty White, speak to me. Nipsey Russell, don't leave me like this, alone and afraid. There is no creature loves me. If I die, no soul shall pity. And wherefore should they, since I myself find in myself no pity to myself? Please, God, don't do this to me. Don't kick me in the patootie. Who the heck am I to feel sorry for myself? My show brought laughter and joy to millions. I've had a good life. Good night, folks.
Every time I've seen this segment, I've always wondered to myself if Rayburn was dead or alive when it was made in 1993, and for this podcast I took the extra step of actually going to Wikipedia and determining that he died 6 years afterward. Considering that Match Game was a staple on cable around this time, I, in particular, remember a year of middle school when I would come home after sixth period and promptly turn on Game Show Network for a 1-2 punch of Match Game 76 and Card Sharks. I wonder if Rayburn ever saw this, and if he did, I wonder what he thought. And then I get sad. Next up is the fourth experiment of the season, an Italian attempt at a lo-fi Bond movie, Secret Agent Super Dragon.
Mr. Lamas, he wants to talk to you.
Introducing the screen's newest, hottest, fastest undercover operator. You name it, he can handle it. Killers, foreign agents, master criminals, blondes, brunettes, redheads, the screen's most luscious, curvaceous, beautiful assassins.
You a natural redhead?
You'll have to take my word for it. For now.
Secret Agent Super Dragon. Starring Ray Danton as the cool, cool spy.
It features a bland secret agent who is neither super nor a dragon, and resembles a younger, more handsome Ben Mendelsohn, no offense, sir, who's called out of retirement after his colleague is murdered with poisoned chewing gum. I swear I'm not making this shit up. After a few absurd plot machinations, Secret Agent Average Monitor Lizard stumbles upon a crime syndicate's dastardly intent to smuggle psychotropic drugs in imported vases in order to take over the world. If you've seen On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which features a Swiss allergy clinic that psychedelically brainwashes impressionable European women into bringing biological warfare agents to the UK, congratulations, you've seen a much better version of this. Plus, if you watch that movie, you would be treated to a bit of Telly Savalas, who was unable to take part in this movie due to scheduling conflicts and also not having been asked. Along the way are many moments of pure tedium, like the epic alleyway brawl that consists solely of white men attempting to do karate and other white men jumping from large heights like spider monkeys onto the backs of their opponents, which gives Servo one of the best riffs of the entire episode.
Looks like the end of Romancing the Stone. It's not funny, I'm just pointing it out.
The episode itself has several great moments too, like a segment where Crow decides to write the definitive spy movie for the more evolved, sensitive 90s, The Spy Who Hugged Me, starring Special Agent Sandy Wyndham Hill, a modern man in touch with his feminine side, and also a secret agent. Servo plays Sandy, while Joel plays his love interest, Holly Affirmations, whom Sandy must turn down because he's in a supportive, committed relationship. It's essentially James Bond after being cured of his issues with women and with years of couples therapy under his belt. Naturally, Servo prefers the manly, misogynistic 60s way of doing things and throws a hissy fit. But it's the next host segment that makes the entire episode. During the Joel years, there were many times where the bots, being essentially surrogate children, have questions about the movie they're watching, as growing boys and girls naturally do. Joel will naturally explain things to them in a way that's always sweet and endearing and often educational, which is why I've dubbed this era of the show my generation's cognitive version of Mr. Wizard's World. In this particular episode, the bot's naivete gets to the root of the level of wit in spy movies.
Hey, Joel, I've got a pretty good handle on what's cool, right?
That's right, you do.
And your average spy movie is generally pretty high on the cool scale?
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing cooler than being a secret agent super spy.
Well, then would you say that this guy, while lame, is typical of most spy guys in most spy movies?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, then I have a question.
I was hoping this was headed somewhere.
How come this guy keeps saying confusing stuff? Like, the time he gets jumped, which is obviously a bad thing, he said, they gave me a real warm reception.
Oh, well, they all go to super secret spy school. That's where they learn to hone their precise skills, like how to simultaneously attract and repel the opposite sex, the virtues of doing espionage in Monte Carlo as opposed to Little Chute, Wisconsin, what makes turtlenecks so darn cool, and most importantly, they take a course called post-kill puns. And that's where you learn to say things like, we went for a little swim, which means they tried to drown me.
Oh, now that's a cool class. Tell me more.
Sure. Oh, yeah. They've got one hard and fast rule there, is you can't kill anyone unless you got a pun. Shooting someone is out. Instead, it'd be more apropos to, like, push someone into the lion's den and say, he went out for a bite.
Oh, or run someone over with a steamroller and say he was pressed for time.
Right, like that.
Or how about push a gal out of a plane and then say, oh, she just stepped out.
Right, and then there's always the classic, I was all tied up, which means
I was all tied up.
Right.
This is honestly the one thing about this era that I truly missed during the Mike years. That's no slam on Mike, as his energy and tone was entirely different, as was his relationship with the bots. But again, I'm getting way ahead of myself. As a little button to Secret Agent Adequate Gecko, there's a little moment that never fails to make me laugh so hard that milk comes out of my nose. And if that doesn't sound impressive, it's because I forgot to mention that I don't drink milk. Maybe I should see a doctor. Anyway, it happens during the introduction to the Invention Exchange, just as Joel deals with a faulty robot created by Crow and Servo and opens communication with Deep 13.
Oh, hi, Joel. That was really something.
That was just for me. I honestly don't care if I wasted 5 seconds of your time. Uh-oh, there goes the milk again.
From ancient Genesis to the modern screen is the name written in blood. Ega!
If I could just call you on the phone. The code of the ghost at the sign of the toad. Nobody lives on the Brownsville Road.
Thrilled to the newest recording star, Archibald Jr.
Oh, they scream in this way.
See ravishing Marilyn Manning in a thrilling, chilling story. The last of the prehistoric giants sees his first girl. Noah. See Ega.
The sixth experiment of the season, Ega, has possibly the most famous and called back reference in the history of the show. In order to get to it, some formalities first. The movie is about a girl named Roxy who almost runs over a caveman played by Richard Keel in the modern-day California desert. Unfortunately, this caveman is neither unfrozen nor a lawyer. He's just been living in a cave and growing a gross beard, which we'll get back to. She tells her adventurer father and her malformed boyfriend Tom about the chance encounter, and her father decides to go looking for the caveman and disappears en route, which gives Roxy and her boyfriend the impetus to go find him, leading to many an awkward and disturbing moment. Anywho, before her father goes missing, Roxy takes him and Tom to the location where she met the caveman and shows him the footprints to prove it. After it's decided that she's not just a hysterical woman, which is usually the case, they set off further into the desert, and her father gives the kids some sage advice.
He left the road right here. Watch out for snakes.
Who said that?
The line was clearly and poorly looped in post-production, as it's played while Roxy's dad is on camera and definitely not speaking. It's so noticeable that Joel and the bots repeat it several times throughout the movie and in many movies to come, especially when the locations involve desert and grasslands. In fact, after the airing of the Netflix revival, the new MST3K cast went on the show's first live tour, riffing 2 movies that each city visited, one of which was Ega with entirely new riffs, and the tour was dubbed the Watch Out for Snakes Tour. Hi Kiba can go suck it. The rest of the movie involves the caveman, who, per the title, is dubbed Ega, who kidnaps Roxy and forces her to shave him and possibly submit to him sexually, all of which Roxy's dad is totally cool with, even going so far as to encourage such activity. Throughout the movie, Tom gets the opportunity to sing at least 2 boring surf ballads, framed by uncomfortable close-ups. It's worth noting that Tom is played by Archibald Jr., and that Archibald Sr. did double duty in the movie, directing and playing Roxy's father. Anyway, after Tom rescues Roxy and her dad, it causes Ega to get blue balls and go on a rampage. And by rampage, I mean break into a motel that is throwing a party for reasons that are unclear, and toss a few people into the swimming pool before being shot by policemen. Typical caveman behavior. Speaking of the aforementioned motel party, the lucky band that booked the gig really gets the place grooving.
I guess she's working through her grief.
Looky, look at my thorax. Looky, looky, look at my thorax. Looky, 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 look at my torso.
Tequila.
One final note about the movie itself, and this comes straight from Mary Jo Pehl in the fabled MSG3K episode guide. The relationship between Roxy and the dad is weird and unpleasant and just not right, and there was speculation in the writing room that they were off-screen lovers. You may come to the conclusion that perhaps the writers were reading a bit too much into the movie, but to refute this, I would say A, watch the movie, because it's fucking palpable, and B, it has since been revealed that Marilyn Manning, who played Roxy, was actually Arch Hall Sr.'s personal secretary at the time of this movie's production. It would be great to get the Mythbusters on this burning question, but they finished production in 2016. You could argue that since the show was rebooted a year later with new Busters, this is still an open case, but I would take the opportunity to simply say, #NotMyBusters. The episode itself is loaded with great host segments, my favorite being a casual and sweet discussion about the nature of hell and how its definition has evolved over the years. Making this segment all the more better is that while the debate goes on, Joel is seemingly fitting Crow for a suit that we never get to see finished, and using Servo's head as a pincushion. Trust me, it's purely visual and purely adorable, but the segment even works in an oral medium.
I don't mind telling you guys, the day this country went self-service was the day that hell began to bubble up and flood the earth.
No, I hate to burst your bubble, Joel, but what about the bubonic plague, World War, Stalin?
Well, come on, those are all big things. You know, hell works better when it's a lot more subtle. Here, I'll give you an example. Okay. Crow, what do you think of Adolf Hitler?
Well, I hate him naturally.
Right, now, what do you think of the band Styx?
Well, you know, they had one or two decent... Oh, my God, you're right.
I get it now, Joel. Oh, I'm not certain when hell started for me, but I think it has something to do with Christopher Cross.
Yeah, well, remember the time that Charlie Weaver died and it wasn't even in the papers?
Yeah, or when they 86 jarts.
I think the first time Flo said, "Kiss my grits," something inside all of us withered and died.
Using Joe Camel to sell cigarettes to kids seems like a pretty ripe slice of hell.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then there was the time Dennis Leary released No Cure for Cancer as an album. And then the time Vicki Lawrence won a Grammy for The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia.
I know I stand alone on this, but the day Blansky's Beauties got canceled.
Yeah, you stand alone on that.
Yeah, pretty much.
Sinbad's pretty icky.
Yeah, what about the Charlene Tilton workout video?
Joel, what chance do we have in a world that keeps presenting us with vivid images of hell?
Well, there's personal liberty, strength of conviction. Those have been known to work. Then there's the time the country rallies together to beat back hell, like the time we as a nation said no to Yahoo Serious.
I remember that. All of us, together, drawn inexplicably to the slobbering mouth of hell, and then, suddenly, somehow, by some unknown force, rescued in the nick of time like Moses and the Israelites.
Now, who in creation is powerful enough to do that?
Gee, Davy, do you think it was God?
We'll be right back.
One last thing before moving on. The invention exchange features Forrester replacing Frank's blood with radiator fluid, which prompts an outrage from Joel and the bots. But as messed up as that is, Forrester's excuse is something absolutely perfect. If I ever decide to do something that violates the laws of nature, and somebody asks me, why did I do it? I'll just take a page from the Forrester playbook and bellow.
And since Frank's blood was a previously unknown type, the money that brings in should... Why? Because it's science, that's why.
Let this be a beacon to all who feel the urge to tamper in God's so-called domain. This is a great excuse. The next experiment of the season is the equally infamous 1944 classic I Accuse My Parents, which tells, in flashback, the story of an exceptionally dull high schooler named Jimmy that unwittingly gets in bed with the mob and eventually ends up on trial for manslaughter. As is standard for legal proceedings, Jimmy, who doesn't seem to have a defense attorney, argues that he shouldn't be punished because he has shitty parents. According to the internet, the movie was, quote, used to teach morals, specifically that parents should take an interest in their children's lives as well as the consequences, both emotionally and psychologically, of child neglect, end quote. But here's the problem. Jimmy's an idiot. Yeah, having alcoholics for parents is a total bummer, and it's embarrassing when your lush mom shows up to a graduation planning committee completely plastered. It also sucks when you want to spend your birthday with your dad, but instead he gives you a few bucks and heads for the nearest bar. But if Jimmy's cognitive abilities were approximate to that of an average intellect, He should learn from his experiences with his folks and apply that knowledge of bad behavior to detect the sinister motivations of a mustache-twirling gangster that contracts him to deliver stolen merchandise to various fences. I personally don't see the correlation between having absentee parents and not being able to spot obvious criminal activity. If my parents were degenerate drunks, I'm pretty sure that I would be more attuned to the obvious signs of corrupt behavior, not oblivious to it. But oblivious is Jimmy's middle name. It's literally Jimmy Oblivious, whatever his last name is. Throughout the incredibly implausible journey to the courthouse, he ends up dating a nightclub singer who is also sleeping with the gangster that's using him. The same gangster tries to have Jimmy killed after he botches a robbery, and after getting a good beating from some goons, Jimmy packs his belongings and bums a ride on an outbound train. As soon as his train gets to a destination, he goes to a diner and tries to rob the owner. In a scene that would never happen in real life, the diner owner sees the good boy deep inside Jimmy's soul and offers to give him asylum in exchange for working at the diner and attending church with him every Sunday, just in case you were wondering how quote-unquote morals were defined in 1944 America. Jimmy promptly puts down the gun and complies with this request for what could be interpreted as 5 days, 5 months, or 5 years. Not that it really matters. He then finally cops to his transgressions and is brought back to his hometown by the diner owner. Jimmy then apparently throws out any lessons he learned from his mandatory church attendance and decides to confront the gangster that tried to have him whacked and accidentally fatally shoots him during a tussle. This brings the story to the trial established at the beginning of the movie, where Jimmy is acquitted of killing the slimy gangster, but convicted of possession of stolen property. His sentence? 5 years suspended and 2 years probation, remanded to the custody of the parents he blamed for his misdeeds until he turns 21. Because when parental neglect leads to manslaughter, the best way to make sure it doesn't happen again is to tempt fate and force said neglectful parents to take on more responsibility. And just in case you forgot you were watching a moralistic lecture from the 40s, which is apparently a time before subtlety was invented, the judge turns to the camera and cautions any parents in the audience to avoid the pitfalls of Jimmy's folks. So the punishment for being a shitty parent ends up being more time to be shitty. Curious. The movie does end on a truly hilarious note, however, as a title card informs the viewer, and I quote,
"To the families and friends of men and women in our armed forces, this picture you have just seen will be shown in combat areas overseas with the compliments of the American Motion Picture."
We could sit here for hours and debate the grammar and logic of those two sentences, so instead let's skip to the big question. What person in the service, in his right mind, would sit through a preachy soap opera for an hour about a subject that certainly doesn't apply to them, when they could be trying to bum nudie mags off their fellow officers, reading comic books, or killing Nazis? I'm pretty sure that if you told them you were going to show them a movie, they would at least expect some titties, or at least the very least, a Bugs Bunny cartoon where he kicks Hitler in the balls. They wouldn't stand for this, or sit for it in this case. Thankfully, I'm not alone in my quibbles about this movie, as Joel and the Bots devote an entire host segment to analyzing Jimmy's mental state and possible sources of psychosis, with the word stupid being the root argument. And speaking of host segments, this episode might have the most amount of classics of any Joel-era episode, not counting his final episode, of course. There's the invention exchange where Frank accidentally bakes a bachelorette party cake with a live stripper inside, and a brilliant reenactment of Jimmy's attempted diner robbery that involves Crow and Servos arming themselves with a tank to extort a hamburger from Joel. But it's the second and third host segments that make this episode a masterpiece for me. Segment 2 sees Joel assign the bots art therapy with truly inspired results. It's the perfect storm of incredibly layered writing and career-best performances from Trace, Kevin, and Jim.
Well, by having you draw pictures of your idealized family, maybe you can escape some of the deep psychological problems that Jimmy, the star of today's movie, suffered because of his family. So let's see what you're drawing, okay? This is Crow's.
That's my dad. He's all powerful. His hands are made of stainless steel, and he has lasers that shoot out of his chest. Pew, pew. I don't have to tell you, he's the coolest dad in the whole neighborhood. And when we go to father-son picnics, we win every event. And he dispenses homespun wisdom and teaches solid Midwestern values while crushing all who block his path.
What about the handlebar mustache?
I don't know.
Okay, let's see here. Oral obsession with mustache indicates nasal labial shame. Good, okay. Now let's see yours here. Tom, what's this?
Okie doke, that's my mom, my dad, and my mom. My mom is Haley Mills, my dad is Gigantor, and my mom is Peggy Cass.
Uh-huh, and why are your moms holding hands, Tom?
I don't know.
Okay, let's see. Latent parent trap syndrome. Man should be in a straitjacket. Okay, Gypsy, well, this one's really nice. What's this one?
Joel, my ideal family is right here, and I know Richard Basehart watches over us all.
Oh, that's really sweet, Gypsy. But tell me, why does Richard Basehart get to play God?
Well, I don't know.
Joel, why are you spending your time psychoanalyzing robots?
I don't know. I'm kidding, of course. We'll be right back. I do know. I really do know.
And you know you have a good episode when that segment isn't your finest moment. No, instead that honor goes to a purely visual piece that fills me with such joy that it drives me mad that because of the constraints of the inherently aural medium, playing the entire clip would be pointless. Based on a musical number toward the midsection of the movie where Jimmy's love interest, the aforementioned nightclub singer, delivers the least sexy ballad ever performed in a mob-owned joint, Gypsy plays the role of the singer, lip-syncing to the show-stopping number as Crow and Servo ramble around the SOL, dressed as waiters, and Joel pretends to be numerous tuxedo-clad admirers that are enchanted by the siren song.
Are you happy in your work? Do you never, ever shirk? Does your morning menu really send you on your way? Do you greet each day? And is it a deal, a real appeal? Feel you're earning your pay? Are you grateful you're alive? Is your day full, 9 to 5, living in the rhythm that I'm speaking of? You'll be happy in your work if you're in love.
Remember at the beginning of this chapter when I discussed the lack of tension on screen between Joel and Jim? This is a prime piece of evidence. The sketch is so light and lovely, the wordless chemistry between both performers so charming that whenever I watch this episode, and believe me, I've watched it quite a few times because I'm a sad, sad man, I always wait for the 42-minute mark with rapt anticipation because it never fails to fill my heart with joy. And if I've ever asked to prove that humankind is capable of grace and wonder, I'll point to this and drop the mic. The 8th experiment of Season 5 is a movie that, to this day, I cannot believe exists. Like Escape from Tomorrow, but for Bond movies.
Neil Connery is too much.
This is too big. The one for me. The one for me.
He has such beautiful friends.
He haunts me. He wants me. He knows how to make a girl fall in love.
He has such beautiful enemies. Neil Connery is too much in Operation Kid Brother. Operation Kid Brother is too much for one mother.
During the episode, it's called Operation 0007, but if you try to watch it on Hulu, download it from RiffTrax, or buy the Shout Factory DVD, the title is always listed, like the trailer, as
Operation Kid Brother.
Likely for legal reasons that should be obvious. Remember the Italian James Bond knockoff Secret Agent Super Dragon from earlier in the season? Since we talked about it probably maybe 15 minutes ago? Well, that garbage is positively quaint when compared to
Operation Kid Brother.
Made in 1967, the movie is about an evil, shadowy organization called Thanatos, hell-bent on world domination via a magnetic wave generator that can shut down all metal-based machinery, and the spy that tries to take them down. Thanatos is not to be confused with the mad titan Thanos, wielder of the Infinity Gauntlet, though were the two swapped, my interest in the movie would have at least quadrupled. Unfortunately, the most suitable secret agent for the job is in the middle of another assignment, so the government turns to that agent's civilian brother Neil to get the job done instead. And by Neil, I mean Neil Connery, the real-life brother of Sean Connery, who plays himself in the movie. That's right, this is a spy movie starring Sean Connery's brother, who is hired to save the world because Sean is busy making an actual James Bond movie. That movie is You Only Live Twice, released the same year. And to make things more perplexing, Neil's secret agent brother is implied to be Sean Connery himself, not the character he plays in the James Bond films. And Neil is a natural replacement for Sean, as his character is a plastic dermatologist, plastic surgeon, hypnotist, and lip reader, all of which are clearly the most sought-after skills in a secret agent. Are you confused yet? Well, if not, don't worry. Within minutes of watching
Operation Kid Brother,
you too will wonder not only how this movie exists, but why. The where and when I have previously established as Italy and 1967. I would try to describe the story and characters, but it would be a lost cause. There's simply no point in trying to make sense of
Operation Kid Brother.
Just know that there was actually a point in time when an actor became such a celebrity that an Italian production company made a movie starring that celebrity's brother in order to capitalize on the depth of said celebrity. But as fascinating as this movie's existence is, the story of how it came to be produced is even more amazing. While his brother Sean was helping to invent the super spy genre, becoming the most famous man in the world, and beating women wherever he went, Neil Connery was living a rather quiet, modest life in Scotland, working as a plasterer. One day, Neil lost his tools and was fired from his job. Because Sean was front-page news, the media was starved for any stories it could possibly milk from his fame, so they took notice of Neil's situation. Not much later, Neil and his trade union were discussing his firing in a radio interview, and Bond film director Terence Young happened to be listening. Young noticed that Neil's voice was almost identical to Sean's, and happened to discuss this with an Italian film producer named Dario Sabatello, who promptly flew to Scotland to screen test Neil for an Italian spy movie. Neil was not an actor in any shape or form, which was clearly evident during the screen test, but that didn't stop Sabatello from hiring him to star in the movie anyway. The script for the movie feels like a pastiche of previously unproduced Italian Bond knockoffs, with Neil awkwardly wedged into it, along with obligatory meta-references to Sean and the James Bond character. But here's where the weirdness comes full circle. As we've established in previous chapters, Italian films of this period traditionally shot without sound and were dubbed in their entirety after the movie was finished editing. In this particular case, Neil was, in his own words, quote, undergoing medical treatment, end quote, during dubbing, so an American actor was hired to perform Neil's lines. That's right. Neil Connery got a leading role in a spy movie because his voice sounded just like his famous brother's, but that voice isn't heard in any version of the movie, essentially defeating the purpose of his participation. And to add insult to injury, Neil also looks nothing like his brother, so every time there's an opportunity to mention his last name, they take it. Yes,
Operation Kid Brother
is one of the most bizarre movies to be riffed on MST3K, and considering what came before, that's really saying something. The episode itself features a host segment called The Sean and Neil Show, Parallel Lives, where Joel and the bots chart the life stories of both Connerys on a line graph.
This line represents Sean's life, this one represents Neil's life. I'll give you an example. Sean's acting talent is discovered at an early age and leads to a long and lucrative film career.
While Neil's talent for selling light bulbs over the phone is discovered, leading to a long life of menial jobs and aimless drifting.
Well, up here is when Sean gets his first $1 million royalty check for the James Bond series.
While Neil gets his first $65 unemployment check after being laid off from the cheese factory.
Yeah, here Sean is declared sexiest man alive by People magazine.
While Neil is declared the stinky cat man in room 4B by the other tenants in his SRO hotel.
Here, Sean calls the most powerful and influential people in Hollywood and is put through immediately.
While Neil calls Pizza Hut and is told that they won't deliver it to him because of bounced checks.
Here, Sean is quoted as saying, During the making of The Man Who Would Be King, I had creative differences with director John Huston.
While Neil is quoted as saying, "My manager at the Happy Chef won't let me off for weekends. What a dink, man."
Here, Sean goes to Spago's and is seated immediately.
While Neil's hot plate malfunctions and burns down his shabby furnished room.
So, Joel, what about that point on the graph where Sean's line actually goes lower than Neil's? Huh?
Oh, well, that was the point where Sean agreed to do Highlander 2, The Quickening, and ironically, that's when Neil had to comfort Sean.
Oh, boy. You know, we should remind the nice folks out there that this is merely artistic speculation on our part of Neil Connery's life. For all we know, he's leading a prosperous, happy existence on a farm in Scotland with his beautiful wife and adoring children.
That's right, Tom. And no matter what's gone wrong with his life, Neil can always look in the mirror and say to himself, well, at least I didn't do Zardoz.
For the record, Neil Connery eventually went back to his life as a plasterer until his career was ended by an accident in 1983. He also appeared in 2 more movies, 1969's Invasion of the Body Snatchers British ripoff The Body Stealers, and a 1984 Hong Kong action comedy called Aces Go Places 3, where he played a character named Mr. Bond along fellow MST3K All-Stars Richard Kiel and Peter Graves. He recently turned 80 and is retired in Scotland, presumably happily married to his wife Eleanor, with whom he has sired 2 daughters. As of this recording, he is still Sean Connery's younger brother.
Operation Kid Brother
Also features one of my all-time favorite invention exchanges, which is presented by Crow.
A vulture, long associated with pestilence and death, is in reality a clean and helpful bird who is quite easy to get along with. So to improve his image, I invented Sarah, the bobbing buzzard.
Sarah?
Yeah. Based on the water-drinking bird, this friendly carrion eater cleans up roadkill or table scraps.
That's great, Crow.
Yeah, it kind of looks like you, Crow.
I think you'll agree there are few sights in nature as beautiful as a plump member of the Cathartidae family pulling a sinewy string of fetid meat off a weak, dead Thompson's gazelle. There's a theme song. Want to hear it?
Sure, Crow.
Bob and Buzzard. Caw, caw, caw. Bob and Buzzard. Caw, caw, caw. Bob and Buzzard. Deedly deedly deep.
What do you think, sir?
Deedly deedly deep. Bob and Buzzard. Caw, caw, caw. By Crow.
As Crow begins singing the theme song, Joel completely cracks up on camera and barely gets through his dialogue. It's totally adorable. The next experiment of the season is the misleadingly titled The Girl in Lover's Lane, one of the most depressing movies ever to be riffed on the show. It doesn't top High School Big Shot or The Brute Man, both of which we'll get to in the weeks ahead, but it's genuinely repellent. It tells the story of a dumb runaway named Danny, who decides to hop on a boxcar out of town and find a mentor in a drifter with a troubled past named Bix Dugan, whom Joel and the bots misidentify as Big Stupid, because they do sound quite alike if you think about it. Similar to the third act of I Accuse My Parents, Danny and Big Stupid end up in a small town and take jobs at the local diner. It's here that Big Stupid meets a pretty young, depressed waitress named Carrie, who he gradually falls in love with. As I mentioned previously, the title of the movie is misleading because Carrie isn't the main character. In fact, she's only in about a third of it. Carrie is routinely harassed by a creepy local played by the great character actor Jack Elam and his trademark wonky eyeball, who is consistently shooed away by a protective Big Stupid. Soon, Carrie and Big Stupid start dating, and by dating, I mean they walk to the local lake and talk about how miserable Carrie's life is when Big Stupid toys with her emotions, and alternates between showing her affection and pushing her away because he's a complicated drifter or some such other bullshit. Eventually, Big Stupid completely rejects Carrie and decides to become a drifter again, so Carrie, an emotional wreck, decides to run off to their dating spot, where Jack Elam's character murders her and leaves her corpse for a remorseful Big Stupid to find. By doing research for this podcast, I found the original theatrical poster for the movie online, which depicts a lifeless Carrie, her skirt hiked up and her blouse torn open, splayed in the grass next to a traditional depiction of Lover's Lane, complete with a car overlooking a mountainside, which again does not appear in the movie. To me, this makes it look like Elam also raped Carrie, which doesn't make the situation any better. And this is the fucking poster from 1960! Who was the target audience for this shit? Back to the movie. Big Stupid is taken into custody for Carrie's murder by the sheriff, and Carrie's father, who also ran the diner, comes into the precinct by force with a band of hooligans and abducts Big Stupid. The hooligans, who believe that Big Stupid is guilty despite his protesting, beat the living shit out of him while Jack Elam watches and smiles. Danny, who until this point has been a completely useless character, points out to the crowd that it was Elam who killed Carrie, and, being all punched out, the crowd simply trips a fleeing Elam and holds him down. Danny then calls his conveniently rich parents and lets them know that he's coming home and bringing a friend with him, but by that point, the damage is done, and Big Stupid is essentially traumatized for life. It's just a complete bummer, and the bots are just as angry as the average decent viewer.
Joel, Tom and I have been horribly scarred by the way this movie ended, and that means we're filled with rage.
We'll just back off, you guys. You can write a different ending if you want. Yeah, it's just fiction. I mean, you don't have to accept the ending they hand you.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, okay. Just a minor change. What would happen if the nice restaurant woman lived?
You think it even occurred to him?
And instead, Jack Elam is
gone.
Right. And then Big Stupid and Danny get a grant and they renovate the cafe. A real Chili's feel without all the Chili's crap. You know, a fun place for a birthday, Joel. Free hats, prize buckets, hoop-de-doody.
How's this? Jack Elam is kidnapped by aliens.
Mean aliens.
Sure, mean aliens. Then Big Stupid and his little pal leave that town because they're driftwood, and then the apocalypse happens. The dinosaurs roam the land, and they capture dinosaurs, and they tame them, and they ride them like horses, and we see the bond between man and lizard, etc., etc. It goes on and on.
Bro, aren't you getting a little bit away from the movie?
Bear with me. And there are pygmies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we live in a vast pygmy kingdom.
Okay.
Personally, I like Crow's ending best. In fact, if that were the actual ending of the movie, I might even recommend it to friends. But as it stands, it's astounding that this movie got made considering what the country seemed to be clamoring for in the same time period. Having seen it at least 3 times, I'm still not really sure what it's about. It's not about Carrie, and there's not enough character development to make it about Big Stupid. Danny is merely a plot device, and there's no particular rhyme or reason to Jack Elam's behavior. It's just awful. The episode as a whole isn't bad, though. There's some solid riffs, and there's a great sketch where Crow impersonates Jack Elam, complete with the wonky eyeball, but the movie is just a slog through human misery that never lets up. If you make it through the entire experience without asking yourself once, what's the point of life? Congratulations, you're more well-adjusted than I. The 10th experiment of the season is 1951's The Painted Hills, a movie that proves that there was once a time in American society when a dog could get top billing in not only 1, but 7 feature films. And that dog was Lassie. Actually, that was the dog's stage name. The dog's real name was Pal, and he was a dude, even though the Lassie character's always been a woman. I suppose that, in that sense, Pal paved the way for the age of gender fluidity that we currently live in today, long before it was socially acceptable. Inspiring. Though it's rarely discussed, Pal, as Lassie, was also one of the first film performers to have Final Cut, and when the character transitioned to television, received 20% of the syndication revenues, the majority of which he or she invested in Milkbones. Pal as Lassie was also among an elite class of actors that were allowed to defecate during filming of scenes, paving the way for such iconoclastic talents as Christian Bale and Dustin Hoffman.
It is almost impossible to resist a picture, a good picture, about a boy and his dog. Such a film is The Painted Hills, produced with typical Metro attention to quality. After a brief absence, Lassie is back on the screen, and better than ever, ready to resume where she left off, entertaining those audiences, both young and old, who have found a natural appeal in the pictorial beauty and down-to-earth drama of all the Lassie pictures. This is Bruce Cowling speaking. I know you'll enjoy The Painted Hills.
Pal as Lassie plays the role of Shep, the loyal companion to a prospector named Jonathan during the California Gold Rush. When Jonathan strikes gold, his partner Lynn decides to hog it all for himself and leads Jonathan to his death, only to have his intentions deduced by the dog. Lynn responds by poisoning Shep, but since Shep is no ordinary dog, she survives and stalks the murderous slime across snowy mountaintops until Lynn plummets off a cliff. All in all, fun for the whole family. That said, The Painted Hills makes up for its relentlessly grim and plotting tone by being shot in glorious Technicolor, a technique sorely needed for films that have lengthy sequences set in the snow, arguably the most colorful of environments. For the episode itself, you would think that, by having a movie to riff with a star like Pal as Lassie as Shep, the MST3K crew would rest on their laurels with a bunch of Lassie jokes. But you would be mistaken. In fact, I don't think I detected a single one, which is the definition of restraint. And in place of that material are plenty of jokes about sausages, and, well, I'll let the material speak for itself.
Who of us will ever know
Me.
what is in the heart of a dog?
Heartworms.
There are also canine-related variations on fan-favorite catchphrases.
Arf Kiba!
Thanks, Shep. I'm out of here. Good luck.
Jim Collie!
As we turn away from Lassie, I've saved 3 episodes of the season for the final section of the chapter, because they all have one thing in common. They all have the unmistakable imprint of a renegade filmmaker who has no equal in the entire history of the entertainment industry. Also, other than Sandy Frank, no other person has as many credits throughout the run of MST3K. Who am I talking about? You'll have to wait until next week to find out on the Coolness Chronicles, the history and legacy of MST3K.
But the show's not over yet, folks. Sorry. Every hour of this fine podcast concludes with a segment called Random Recommendations. This week's random recommendation continues last week's tradition of indirect recommendations, stemming from a discussion on an old episode of How Did This Get Made? The podcast is co-hosted by Jason
Over here, right? Baby on the aisle.
Give me your baby.
Mantzoukas. For those who have been listening from the very beginning, he's actually my personal choice for the role of Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham, in my script treatment for Weird World that I've been trying to pimp out to Marvel Studios on this very podcast, with little to no luck. The discussion was centered around the Britney Spears Zoe Saldana road movie Crossroads, and how it was not the uplifting, coming-of-age movie it presented itself to be. Here's a clip.
If you want to watch a movie that I feel like is about female relationships from youth to getting older, watch both Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants movies.
Ooh, Jason.
Because they're good movies that do that well.
Yeah.
If you want to watch a movie that is pop stars so bad it's good, watch From Justin to Kelly. This is neither nor.
Right.
Yeah. But I want to bring up one thing which you didn't...
And I'm not kidding.
separates this is I
Sisterhood of
think-
the Traveling Pants is an amazing
Yeah,
movie.
Both of them are good? Even two is good?
Both.
Both are
I
good.
cried at 2 on an airplane like
I've
a
cried at both.
bitch.
I've cried at both.
Yes, I actually watched The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, and I too cried. Twice. It's a movie that I never figured in a million years, despite only being alive for 32, that I would ever watch, much less thoroughly enjoy. But enjoy I did, and I was even looking forward to watching the sequel. I'll elaborate. I always thought that this movie series, which is about to become a trilogy, looked like a Hallmark production, so I've stayed away like the plague. But this first feature is actually a relatively solid, if not totally sitcom-y narrative with genuine emotional beats and characters to care about. I've always had a great affection for well-done, sincere melodrama. My favorite television show of all time is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants is very much that personified. The 4 leads are all hour-long television stars, which certainly helps the proceedings, as it's very much a feature-length television show. There's Alexis Bledel, whose show Gilmore Girls I've been obsessed with since I was a teenager, playing mousy artist Lena. America Ferrera, whose show Ugly Betty I actually watched the first 2 seasons of when I worked for Blockbuster and had free rentals to burn, playing shy, awkward Carmen, even though she's the cutest of the 4. Blake Lively, star of Gossip Girl, which I watched for at least 3 seasons, which we'll get to in a future season, as carefree but deeply hurt Bridget, and Amber Tamblyn, whose show Joan of Arcadia I avoided but whom personally I've always admired, as moody, intellectual Tibby. When these teenage ladies are about to be split apart for the first summer ever through circumstances that can best be called character arcs, the night before they have to separate, they come upon a particular pair of pants.
Ay, Dios mío! Lena! Are you serious? You have a body. Lena Calagaris has a body! Stop it! When did this happen? You look good in it! You good? Little Lena! Bridget, you're the one who loves jeans so much, why don't you try them?
Maybe because I'm 3 inches taller than you.
Fair's fair. Hey, how can they be perfect on you, too?
Wow, that is
I don't know,
a little
but,
weird. It's really starting to freak me out. Okay, Karma, it's your turn. Carmen. You try them on.
You have
come on,
to.
Bea, honestly.
Are you serious? You think that a pair of jeans that fits all three of you is going to fit all of this?
Put them on
We'll help your
now.
thighs get into them. Don't worry about
Tibby. Put them on now.
Will you help me get out of them? Carmen, we all try them on.
Yeah.
Let's try them. All right. My thighs.
Sassy britches.
Okay, here we go. What? I told you guys I'm just gonna take them off and we're gonna pretend like this never happened.
Carmen, come over here and look at yourself. They look amazing on you.
Call me crazy, but it's scientifically impossible that a pair of pants could fit me.
And me.
And me. And me.
There is nothing inherently magical about the pants, but they keep the girls spiritually linked by being shared through FedEx throughout the summer. They travel all the way from Lena, who's busy falling in love for the first time while rooming with her grandparents in Greece, to Tibby, who's producing a documentary about retail workers with a young girl named Bailey who has a big secret back at home, to Bridget at soccer camp in Mexico where she starts hitting on a coach and gradually finds out that she might be manic depressive, and over to Carmen in South Carolina, dealing with her father, played by the great Bradley Whitford, getting remarried. As the pants travel to and fro, we follow these four parallel storylines simultaneously, with them occasionally weaving into one another in often not very subtle ways. Whenever the pants arrive in a girl's storyline, they lead to a momentous moment, making it seem as if the pants may have magical, mystical properties. Alas, no CGI fairy dust, but that would have been a lot of fun. If I had to rank my interest level in the stories, I would put Lena's Greek adventure at the bottom, Bridget in Mexico second to last, surpassed by Carmen getting southern fried, and topped off by Tibby's arc where, spoilers, it's eventually revealed that the little girl she's begrudgingly accepting as a crew member, Bailey, actually has leukemia. If you can watch that entire storyline and not be a weeping mess at the end, or during Bradley Whitford and America Ferrera's last scene, it is you who have the problem. Not I, you. I watched the movie with my brother, which I admit was an act of subterfuge and guilt-tripping on my part, so he spent the second half of it on his phone, which is natural for him, looking up spoilers for further books in the series, of which there are 5, eventually revealing to me what a brutal bummer the last book seems to be. I'll save what those spoilers are exactly, because they actually play a role in my viewing of the sequel. If you've ever been a teenage girl, you might enjoy this film. If you feel emotionally like a teenage girl, like myself, you will enjoy most of this film and cry twice. If you're currently a teenage girl, someone is forcing you to listen to this podcast. I want you to run to safety immediately. Run for your life! Please send me your random recommendations on Twitter, Facebook, or email, and make sure to explain why you endorse it. I didn't ask that at first, and it actually made research more difficult. Before I conclude, I wanted to thank everyone involved in making MST3K for everything they've contributed to my life and culture as a whole. Double thanks for also writing the episode guide that I will quote frequently in this season of the pod. And I also want to thank Shout Factory for their excellent supplemental material that was invaluable to my research for this and every episode to follow on this subject. You can get the show on DVD at Amazon.com, but if you want to support the artists who made this wonderful show, many episodes are available on VOD on rifftracks.com. I'm not affiliated with any of these organizations, I just work here. Thanks for listening. Please rate and review the show on iTunes or your chosen source. If you enjoy the program, share it with someone else. This is the best and largest endeavor I've seen to completion, and it would be nice to keep making the show until it just isn't fun anymore. Links to all subjects discussed on the pod can be found on our website at www.coolnesschronicles.com. There you can email your questions, comments, or random recommendations. You can also contact me on Twitter at CoolnessPodRyan, or like our Facebook page and watch for updates. Have suggestions for future seasons, as this series is not exclusively about MST3K, it's just a natural first topic, or things to discuss that are MST3K related, send them on over. If you want to advertise in this program, I'm a total sucker for a sponsor, so I'll pimp out any product you have. And our next chapter will be posted soon. Until then, do what you love, don't be a dick, and as always...